and welcome to the channel. In my final year at MSU, I was invited to join a research expedition to the Zjonya Wetlands in northern Sweden. It was part of an exchange through the AWC, Arctic Wellness Cooperative, which is funded by members of the Arctic Council and private stakeholders in the area. Myself and Roger Rodge Dawson took a flight in early May. During the 55-minute stopover at Arlanda, Stockholm, we met Helena Angermark from the Royal Institute of Technology. When we arrived at the airport in Umao, we met one last member of our expedition, Camilla Ostermo from Lulaire University. From there, it was a long drive north. The Zjonya Wetlands are huge. We're talking about 700,000 hectares of maya and wetlands, just above the Arctic Circle, under optimal conditions, and excluding factors like sleep, food, terrain, and weather. It would take about 11 days to cross on foot. In my mind, it conjured up images of the dead bogs from Lord of the Rings, but Helena assured me that it was nothing like that. Roger and I had no idea what to expect. We'd bought our equipment in advance. The suites were responsible for everything, practical on site, except for our personal equipment. We were to spend 4 days in the bog itself, and another 4 days for travel. We wanted to make sure we had wildlife and camping experience. But you can't prepare for something like the Arctic bog. May is a strange time in northern Sweden. While it is technically spring, temperatures can still drop below zero. The weather can vary from sweltering heat in the afternoon to frost in the early morning. So while we had a variety of clothing, we still had to be flexible, enough to change during the day. Nothing fits everyone up there. The further north we went, the more things started to look the same. Long stretches of road through the wilderness that seemed to lead nowhere. Nothing but moss, undergrowth, and scattered spindly trees. I was chewing on my last Lin Jim when Helena brought up a laptop. So we have 8 designated sites where we have to do some sampling. She said, but Camilla and I have been talking, and we think we should get at least one more in. We need to go a bit to get some reliable results. When are you going to talk about that? I asked. I have to read the group chat, Raj said. I told you to join. I'm in. I'm just not getting any notifications. Then you are not in. I'm telling you I'm in. Either way, said Helena. If we take a detour north after Site 3, we should get some reliable samples before we reach 4. That should work with your schedule. You are the locals. You got this, said Raj. I'll leave that to your judgment. We're not locals, Camilla said. I'm from Lulaire. That's like a 4-hour drive. Stockholm is like 12 hours drive from there. So we're going in blind? I asked if any of you had been there before. That's kind of the point. To get to know it. Camilla said. To give the next group something to compare with when they do another expedition in about 5 years' time. Talk about long-term cooperation. Helena smiled, just like it says on the website. Raj leaned over and patted me on the shoulder. He held up his phone. I just checked and you're not in group chat. We had been stuck in the car all day. We went over our notes, plans, equipment, and route. Much of what had inspired the expedition in the first place. Reports of changes in the wildlife. The local Sami people had moved their reindeer herds northwards, claiming that their animals were from the soil. There were also reports of reduced fish populations and increased bird migration in the southwest. We were there to measure possible toxins and soil changes to determine a cause if possible. But first we needed samples. That was the meat of the expedition. These began to appear. Small villages along the forest road. Well, maybe not villages. More like loose collections of houses within sight of each other. Red houses with white corners and metal roofs. How anyone could live so isolated was beyond me. Still, somehow we had good phone coverage. We passed through a town with a name. I won't even begin to pronounce or spell it. Too many vowels. It was our last stop, before heading into the wetlands. So we made sure we stocked up. Camilla got us some extra batteries. It was dark when we finally arrived. We'd been following a gravel road for the last 40 minutes. 40 minutes. There were 6 houses in a semicircle along the road. We'd rented one of them for the night. The rest were abandoned. Camilla dragged his things inside and collapsed on the sofa in the living room. Helena took the downstairs guest room. There was a second bedroom upstairs with 3 smaller beds. Smaller beds for me, and rods to occupy. I was asleep the moment my head hid the pillow. The next morning, it was all hands on deck. Helena was in the kitchen making sandwiches, while Camilla checked the equipment. All batteries charged, all containers properly labeled and sorted. She was meticulous, and at 5:30 a.m., we were ready to go. I took a moment to take in the atmosphere. The smells were strange yet familiar. The air was humming with insects. I could hear birds nesting in every direction. Although the 4 of us were the only people in the area for miles, felt very alive. It was a vast forest without a canopy, with the waking sun looking down at us from an endless sky. Eleanor took the lead, with Rodge following. Then there was Camilla, and finally me. There were paths marked with orange flags, showing us the way. "Does anyone know any good songs?" Eleanor asked. "You could teach us some," said Rodge. "Preferably something we can pronounce." "As long as we make noise," said Camilla. "Keeps the bears away." We began our rendition of Smear Grodner as we trotted along the trail, deeper into the wetlands. Minutes later, it was clear to me there would be no way to navigate the Maya without those little flags. Everything looked the same trees, the same bushes, the same moss, and no clear paths to follow. We weaved and bobbed through the mire. We all wore those big rubber boots and trousers, along with backpacks that only reached halfway down our backs. There were places where we had to wade through water that could come up to our knees, so we had to stay as dry as possible. It was painful to walk through, and I could feel a rash on my thighs within the first 15 minutes of walking. We reached our first site at 7 a.m. Camilla brought out the test equipment. She and Rodge took turns, calling out what kind of samples they were getting, while Helena recorded everything on a laptop. I cataloged and filed everything. Took us about 30 minutes all in all, as we packed up and moved to the second site. Camilla pointed out something in the undergrowth. "Lots of animals here," she said. "Look," she pointed to the ground. But I saw nothing. I shrugged my shoulders. "How do you say it, Shotran Helena? What's in cloudberry? There should be cloudberries here. See the petals?" "What the hell is a cloudberry?" Rodge asked. "Never heard of them. Makes great jam," Eleanor added. "Maybe we'll see some further on," said Camilla, "where there's fewer animals." Took us another 4 hours to reach the second site. We drove in circles for a while, and had to use the Saturn AV to find our way back. Standing out there with water up to my knees, looking for the orange flags. It was scary. Camilla seemed confident though. "If the worst comes to the worst, we'll just go straight southwest," she said. "As long as we can see the sun, we can navigate." True enough, when we got to the second side, there was a stretch of dry ground where we could rest. We stopped for lunch. Helena set up a portable stove to make us some coffee, while Camilla and Rodge collected the samples. "Soil, water, vegetation, all sorts. Still nothing?" said Camilla, poking around in the moss. "No cloudberries." "Cloudberries," Rodge added. "Right, cloudberries. All gone." "Is that strange?" I asked. "Sorted. Reindeer don't usually go this far out." We finished and moved to Site 3. We finished just after dinner. We still had a few hours before sunset, so we decided to head north. Camilla and Helena had found a place where we could get more reliable samples, and it was only a few hours off the trail. There would also be plenty of dry land to set up camp on, so it didn't interfere too much with our schedule. As we left the trail, and left the orange flags behind, I got this itch down my spine, like I was stepping into something I could not control. Those little flags were the only trace of civilization left. Without them, we were in the deep wilderness. And yet, no cloudberries. We set up camp around 8 p.m. The sun was getting low. but we had plenty of torches. We changed our clothes, put up our tents, and crawled into our sleeping bags. Camilla read an article about erosion, and Helena uploaded the best pictures to Instagram. Even now we had great coverage. Roger took notes and double-checked our batteries. I tossed and turned for hours, but I just couldn't get a shot. My eyes kept popping up. Long after everyone else was asleep, I was still awake. It was pointless to keep trying, so I decided to leave. I left the tent and walked around for a while. The horizon was blood red, and the sparse trees cast long shadows across the camp. The thought struck me. We'd forgotten to put up the mosquito lights. This place should be swarming with mosquitoes, but there were none. It was all quiet. Not a bird, not an insect, nothing at all. Only creaking branches, gently swaying in the wind, compared to what we'd felt when we first stepped into the bog. That was dead. It was almost midnight when I saw something in the distance. It was this long stretch of ankle-deep mossy water next to our campsite. I looked at it for at least 10 minutes before I realized that one of the trees wasn't a tree. It was a reindeer. The thing was standing perfectly still, not even moving its head, and mistook its antlers for branches. I sat there looking at it for at least half an hour, and in all that time, it hadn't moved a muscle, not a twitch of the neck, nothing. I had never seen anything like it. Finally, I went back to my tent. I hardly slept. The next morning, the reindeer was gone. I told Camilla about it, and she insisted that they were shy creatures. They'd stay away from us. Maybe they were just curious. We got the extra samples early in the morning and headed east towards our main route. By this time, we were all soaking wet and in a sour mood. Camillo and Rock had a long and heated discussion about conservation efforts and EU regulations, while Helena kept stopping to take pictures. Around 9 a.m., we all heard something in the distance. The discussion died down as we all cocked our heads and listened. At first I thought it was an injured animal. There was this rising and falling squeak, like a big bird call. It took a few seconds for us to realize that it was a human being. A monotonous scream, over and over, the exact same pitch and tone. This desperate, heart-rending cry of death. "Help!" Helena said. "Someone's calling for help." We circled back, trying to locate the sound, but it seemed to be getting fainter and fainter, as if whoever was calling to us was moving further away. We tried shouting back, but they didn't seem to be getting any closer. After about half an hour, we couldn't hear them anymore. Raj was visibly shaken. His cheeks were quite watery. We were all a bit worried. Camilla tried to make sense of it. She said it could have been an animal, but we couldn't work out what it was. Still, it had to be an animal. Had to be. As we made our way to the site we shared our thoughts. There were a lot of things out there that didn't add up. No birds, no insects, no animal droppings or markings. Fell away. We found our way back to the main trail, with the orange flags. We followed them. We spotted something that would haunt us forever. On the path ahead was this large, overhanging tree, much larger than others in the area, and hanging from the tree were no less than 4 reindeer carcasses. They appeared to have been placed there, antlers tangled in the branches. Dry and scarred flesh hung like diseased fruit. Hooves gently tapping against each other in the gentle breeze, like a nightmare wind chime. Helena put down a phone and Camilla stared, slightly jawed. Raj looked at me for reassurance, but I had none to give. Camilla tried to say something, but lost the words. She collected herself. She tried again. Sometimes the bears hide their prey. This isn't hiding. Raj said, "This is full display. I don't know what to tell you." We looked around. We spotted strange markings on their backs, mostly hoof marks, but also something else. We were all shaken when we saw it. It haunted me. I could almost imagine hearing the dead hooves if I stopped to listen. Helena had taken a phone out again and didn't look up from it. We got the site for 1 p.m. Same procedure as always. Camilla and Raj got the samples. Helena took notes. I cataloged and filed them. We had a late lunch, but couldn't find anywhere to set up the kitchen to make coffee. We were going deeper. We went into the deeper mud, and dry land was becoming scarce. Following the orange flags, we had to stop several times to navigate. We came up to what should have been a large lake, but there was nothing. A slope into more moss with no trees. If anything, it looked like the water had been drained. Helena took some pictures, but Camilla was convinced we had lost our way. There was no way a lake could disappear on its own. We must be going the wrong way, no matter what the Satanav told us. Nevertheless, we followed the flags, and just after 2 p.m., we came to this huge open space, with a tree spread out. We could see for miles, and somewhere out there, we heard it. Again, someone calling for help. The same monotonous cry, the same pitch. This time we didn't answer. Instead, we just stood there and listened. We identified at least 2 sources, one to our northeast and one to our west. The cries were coming from 2 different directions. It must be a bird, Camilla said. A mating call or it's not a bloody bird, whispered Helena. It's a person. What's more likely, Helena asked Camilla. A pair of identical twins are following us and calling out to us, or that we're hearing the echoes of a nesting bird. I don't think anyone here is an ornithologist, Raj said, so we can't say for sure. But yes, I don't think it's a person. Saying hello. Birds can't pronounce L or P. Say what you like, but that's something else. We drove through Site 5 and stopped for the night. Halfway to Site 6, I was getting nervous. I kept imagining that repeated call for help. Out there in the Maya, I thought I saw antlers between the dead trees a few times. I was getting paranoid. Page 6 was our furthest point, before we started the circle back. But this was dangerous territory. One sprained ankle could mean the end of the whole expedition. The orange flags had stopped some time ago. They didn't cover our entire route. From then on we were on our own. But Camilla was confident, and with only 3 sites to go, we were ahead of schedule. There was barely enough for us to pitch our tents. But we managed. The ground was damp, and I had a puddle of something cold next to my feet. It was uncomfortable to say the least. I collapsed into an uncomfortable but welcome sleep. Raj gently shook me awake. Sometime in the middle of the night, he was holding a finger to his lips and put his hand to his ear, as if telling me to listen. There was that scream again, and it was much closer. I got dressed and got out of the tent. Camilla and Helena were already awake. We all huddled together at the edge of our camp. I looked out over the moor. It was too dark to see, but the screamer couldn't be far away. Camilla held up a torch and nodded at us. We nodded back. We needed to see what this thing was. She turned on the torch. There were a dozen reindeer, about 60 feet in front of us, all standing at exactly the same angle, looking straight at us. None of them blinked, moved, or recoiled from the light. We all froze, not wanting to make any sudden movements. These were supposed to be shy woodland creatures, but something was wrong. One of them opened its mouth slightly, stared at us, and called out in a perfectly human voice, "Help!" Helena covered her mouth and stifled a cry. The reindeer called out to us one by one, all of them, with the same mechanical movements and the same voice. Help! It was eerie. Raj decided that enough was enough and stood up. He tried to make himself tall. He stretched out his arms and waved them up and down. He huffed and puffed, trying to scare them off. They didn't react at all. That was until the reindeer at the front turned its head to look straight at him. It slowly raised its front legs and leaned back. In a matter of seconds, stood upright like a human being. The others gathered around him, circling like a school of sharks. All the while it kept screaming for help. "Don't provoke it," Camilla whispered. "They're sick. They look sick." "We should go now," said Helena. No one argued. Camilla stood guard, while the rest of us packed up as quickly as we could, all to the sound of constant cries for help. We were sloppy, but considering the panic that was building up in my chest, it was a miracle we got anything at all. Raj and I were halfway through, of stuffing the tent into his bag, when we heard something. Movement in the forest. Another call for help. This time from the west. Raj got another torch and checked it out. As he turned it on, I could see a dozen more eyes staring back at us. They were much, much closer. They're everywhere. Raj gasped. "It's a herd," said Helena Angermark. "They used to move herds through here." She was interrupted by another scream. This one from the reindeer right next to us, within arm's reach of Camilla. But the cry was deeper, drawn out and much clearer. The deer were still standing in the middle of the bog. Were still standing there, staring at us. As the screen faded, we all held our breath. No one wanted to move. No one wanted to act. It all hung on a flimsy balance, and anything could tip the scales. Hooves came trembling through the camp. These massive 3 ranger-pound creatures, running wild, bumping into each other, crashing through bushes, running headlong into trees, tripping over rocks and roots. They were like raging sharks, smelling blood in the air. One of the reindeer reared up and bore down on Camilla. Over and over again, I could hear her chest, as all the air was squeezed out of her lungs. Her torch fell from her hands, rolled into the mossy water, and was swallowed by the darkness. Raj started to run but didn't get far. One of them bit his arm as he tried to get past it, sending him staggering to the ground. From there, they had no trouble beating him to a pulp. Heavy hooves shattered bones as if they were dry, past her. It was absolutely, horribly morbid. I crawled as hard as I could to keep out of sight. There were so many of them, but they only seemed to attack what was directly in front of them. Still, one might stumble upon me and decide to kill me, but I was running out of options. I kept to the ground and moved slowly. My hands sank into the centimeter-deep moss. The icy water floated to the surface. My veins ached. They were screaming all around me, and somewhere in the stream of wails, both Raj and Camilla had fallen silent. One of them almost stumbled over me, gave me a light kick in the chest. I only say mild because it didn't kill me, but I'm pretty sure it bruised a few ribs. Another kick to my thigh, ripped open a 2-inch gash down my side. Still, bit by bit, I made it out. I kept going. No matter the noise, no matter the pain, I kept going. As the sun rose, I couldn't hear them anymore. I collapsed into the moss, panting like I had just run a marathon. There were no songbirds, no insects, nothing. Just me, the sun, and the Maya. I used the elastic from my underwear to make a makeshift bandage. I used twigs from a tree to soak up the blood. It wasn't a deep cut, but it could easily become infected. I could still stand, but I felt the stabbing pain in my chest. With every breath I took, I could see a deep bruise forming, going straight from blue to reddish purple. I was lost. I was in the middle of nowhere, with little to no equipment. I had never been so scared in my life. I was screaming and crying. I don't know how long. At one point I wanted to lie down and just wait for someone to find me. The next I wanted to run blindly straight ahead. After a while, I collected myself. I thought about what I'd learned about the area and what I'd seen. I knew that there were flags along the safe routes. I could also use the sun to navigate. If I went straight southwest, I should come across flags again. From there, I just had to follow them. I'd either end up back where we started, or to the other side of the wetlands. Either way would be a long walk, and there was no guarantee I'd make it. But I had to try. I tried not to think, not to reflect. I concentrated on the road ahead and the position of the sun. Everything else was secondary. But every flash of what had happened that night felt like a cut in my stomach. The way Camilla's torch disappeared. Roger screamed at our first bite. The only one I couldn't explain was Helena. I hoped against hope that she had come out, that she had the same idea as me. Maybe I'd meet her later. If not, I could tell the police that there was at least one person missing. They'd have to send out a rescue party. I must have walked for hours. It is surreal to walk in a room where all you can hear is yourself. There's usually some kind of external sound. A car driving by, a bird squawking, an engine humming. Something somewhere in the distance. Out there, there was nothing, just the ever-present crackling of dry branches snapping beneath my heels. As I limped forward step by step, I lost all sense of time, swaying back and forth between single-minded purpose and scattered despair. But in a moment of clarity, I stopped to listen. The screams again. They were ahead of me, so they weren't following me. They were just in the area. I jumped when I saw branches moving in the wind. My reptilian brain thought they were antlers. I crouched down and listened. Helena. This cry wasn't like the others. It wasn't the same sound over and over again. It was different and irregular. She wasn't screaming for help, but in pain. She was alive. Now I had two choices. I could try to keep moving until I found the flags, and just hope to get out somehow. Or I could try and find Helena and her things. She had the nerve last time I checked. It was a battle between my instincts and my head. I'd be putting myself in danger either way. But if I could help her, I had to try. The least I could do was try to get some supplies. I followed Helena screaming. She was heading straight north, deeper into the swamp. She was on the move, slowly but surely. I measured the distance. After a while, she stopped screaming. I thought she had passed out. Took me about an hour of searching. Before I found something, there was a young tree that had been stripped of its leaves and covered in blood, as if someone had grabbed it from the ground and dragged their hand along it. There were clear red stains across the leaves. There was no trail to follow, but I could hear something moving to the north. Perhaps more reindeer, perhaps Helena. The ground was getting muddy, but there were algae and reeds drying in the sun. In the distance, I could hear screams. Not like Helena, not like a person, just these creatures pretending to be human. But there are more of them now, so many more. I could hear dozens of them screaming back and forth, screaming for help. I pressed on. I needed to see to know. There was something ahead and I needed answers. There was a small hill, and beyond it, a sudden drop. I crouched on the edge and looked down. There was this dried-up lake, with a deep crack in the ground running down the center, revealing parts of a dark underground cavern. Through the mud and debris, I could smell the moss drying in the sun. It must have been midday by now, and the sun was casting harsh shadows across the bog. There were hundreds of reindeer, hundreds of them, some standing. Others were shuffling along on all fours, all moving in a circle around the crack in the ground. Something massive was moving. Some of the reindeer were dragging things with them, pieces of meat, dead birds and fish. I could have sworn one of them was a dragon. Parts of Camilla's tent. They were neatly lined up, and took turns throwing whatever prize they had into the crevice. Those who had nothing to contribute stayed off to eat. Everything looked so different in this light. I could have sworn that most of the moss and flowers they ate looked strangely blue. And there, among the debris, was Helena, her unconscious body being dragged unceremoniously through the mud and dumped in front of the crevice. I could see her head moving, struggling to regain consciousness. I could hear her mouth moving, but there was no way to hear her over the wailing screams of the creatures. But for a brief moment, I could have sworn that she saw me, just a moment of recognition. Then, without a sound, something emerged from the crevice. A long, bone-white hand, big enough to wrap its fingers around her chest, pulled her carefully into the darkness. For a moment, the reindeer fell silent. A terrible crunching sound echoed through the makeshift clearing. And seconds later, the reindeer made a new noise. This time it was Helena's voice. A tired, barely conscious voice. "Come down," it said. "Help me." Those 4 words repeated over and over, by all of them, in her voice, in all constellations and combinations. "Come, help, come down, help get down." The terrible screams replaced by a dying whisper. A whisper, meant for me. I was too scared to move. I stayed there looking down. Every now and then, this big bone-white arm would appear. Sometimes they would take away something inedible. Sometimes, they would grab a reindeer to drag it into the depths. Once, a white finger touched a reindeer's forehead and made it stand up on its hind legs like a humanoid. Those who stood up seemed to be of great importance, and the others surrounded them, but there was no one to save, and there was nothing left for me to collect. All that was left was for me to leave and never look back. I kept walking south. Every now and then I'd hear it, a whisper of, "Come help me," making its way through the sparse vegetation. Come help me. These things were everywhere, and they were looking for me. Reindeer have an excellent sense of smell, so I took a quick dip in the water of Stell Lake to hide my scent. Smell. My lake would definitely be infected. I limped through the undergrowth, stopping only to listen for clues and which paths to avoid. By nightfall, I still hadn't found any flags. My leg was in such searing pain that I couldn't lean on it, and my muscles ached. I was constantly out of breath. I did not want to take too much air into my lungs, but I had to go on. There was a good chance I would die out there. If I had to spend the night out in the open, temperatures could easily drop below freezing. As soon as the blood red began to glow in the distance, I knew I was running out of time. My hands were shaking and I could barely stand. I could barely move. All I wanted to do was sit down and hope that everything would be all right. In the morning, it was so easy to fool myself, but I just kept going. I stopped. There was something in front of me. I caught a glimpse of eyes reflecting the setting sun. For a moment they were fixed on me, and a second later, it broke into a sprint. I thought I was finished. I had no fight left in me. I turned to run, but I only made it a few steps before I stumbled. And then, a shot. The reindeer collapsed beside me. His big black eyes met mine. It struggled to breathe. "Help me," it whispered in Helena's voice. "Come down. Come help me." I didn't understand what she was saying. It was just noise, but there was something there. And when the reindeer opened its mouth to speak again, I caught a glimpse of it. Something thin and bone-white, lingering far down its throat. Something vaguely humanoid. A second pair of eyes looking up. And then, another shot. I was blinded by a flashlight. There were 3 men, all speaking Swedish. All dressed in some kind of logging company jackets, with trucker caps. They were all wearing these yellow reflective vests. I told them I didn't understand, and they changed their heavily accented English. British American. One of them asked American. I said we. That was me. Attack, yes. You are attacking, he nodded. We know. Come on. The 3 men dragged the reindeer away, tied a rope around its antlers, and struggled to hoist it up a nearby tree, just like the tree I'd seen with the others a few days before. "Keeps them here," said the man who helped me. "Makes her good us. Boundary. Like a warning," I added. "Yes, like a warning." He nodded. They understand. We looked up at the body hanging from the tree. They were no longer smart here. I was taken back to their base camp. About 8 people living in caravans. They gave me fresh clothes. They gave me hot dogs, beer, and a stick over the fire. They disinfected my thigh and stitched me up, while I tried to sleep off the coming fever. They called the police and the embassy in Stockholm. And the next day I was on a plane back to the States, as if nothing had happened. The aftermath was pretty much nothing. It was classified as an animal attack and dismissed. I talked to some people from the AWC about it, and they called it a very unfortunate incident, and Asmeter remained discreet, so as not to discourage future climate change studies. The AWC is still active in the area, by the way. I don't have any answers as to what they've done with the soil samples, or if they ever investigated what I saw in the Maya. All I know is that nobody wants me to talk about it. The only people I have gotten answers from were the hunters. They were eager to tell their stories. They claim the government refuses to listen. I'm still in email contact with some of them, and there's a lot to unpack. But in short, there was an earthquake in the swamp. Something came out of the lake. It did something to the wildlife in the area. It has stolen hundreds of reindeer from the local Sami herds. It seems to be expanding. It only stops where it meets immediate and violent resistance, and over time, it seems to learn